So what this is here, this is a little model that I was making of my son. It's still pretty early on. You can see the hair is not done over here yet, but I worked in sort of a half of the geometry at a time. And if you look at the seam, it's not really connected yet, but I'll basically work on one side because all I want to do is double it over. And this is my son, kind of about a couple of years ago. This is proportions. Oh, he's got a leg on there though. Oh, poor kid. He's got a blocked foot though. But you can see I really was working on the face and whatnot. So this isn't what I do per se, but I think the thing about whatever you do, it's always good to sort of, again, my focus is always in animation. And so what I want to do is, I get models that other people make. So I do sort of miss the going in there and being the guy who applies that certain mount shape. So I wanted to kind of know also kind of how these things work. Like the skin. So you see how the meshes come in here, and they're basically built from little small planes, like if you took a piece of paper and you folded it and cut it out. That's basically how you're making this, and so it defines the shape here. And by doing this, I'm able to learn more about what other guys in my team are doing that I'm working with, and then therefore helps me do a better job of what I'm doing, because I know kind of, oh, here's what's going on, or if I'm communicating with a modeler, I know kind of what they're dealing with a little bit more. And also it's kind of fun for me as an artist to go back in there and broaden what I do, and I can see some art in this and the sculpting and whatnot. And then long term, I would take this and I would be able to put textures on here and then put a rig on the skeleton inside there and move them around, and then I'd ultimately have something I could play with that I've actually made. So again, the thing about, I think what drew me to art was the ability to make stuff, whether it be for my mother making her stuff for Christmas, and a clay pot, or a picture that I drew of her. I always like making things, and I enjoy editing for the same reason. I'm making something, taking something and putting it together and making it something that I can show people at the end. So I enjoy the communication that comes with art, but also the idea that just trying different things, whether it be painting or sculpting. I always like to sculpt. But that's kind of, again, I think that's the neat thing about this, and where I've been able to work with Disney and at EA and now at N-Space, is there are a lot of amazing artists around me that have a lot other areas developed artistically that I don't have, and I can go to them and say, hey, I want to do an ear. How do I do an ear? So this gets pretty tricky for a guy like doesn't know what they're doing. And so I made this ear thing kind of real rough. I think this is a smoother version over here. This is the rough version. You see the difference? And that's a little smoothed out a little bit more. But again, for a guy like me, that was pretty challenging. But I could go to work and say, hey, I got stuck here last night, and could you help me out? I think the thing about art that's always been pretty neat that I've enjoyed is it's definitely a community type thing. And there are people who hoard information, but generally artists that I've always been around are kind of into sharing stuff. I found this new trick out, and this is what I did. So if you come to them and say, hey, I'm working on this, and they love just sharing what they're doing. So the thing about art is you always want to keep moving forward, I guess.
So you were into making movies,
right?
And now you're doing video games,
right?
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's a lot different, obviously. I mean, the thing about movies versus video games is that things are a lot more, obviously, at least in what I worked on Madden and NCAA football games. So everything's based on a yearly cycle. So you're always trying to find a new angle on football every year. So there's a little bit of repeating things, but then also trying to make a new spin on everything. So the processes are different. There are some things that are similar where you'll do cinematics like the intro to make them onto the field. That's more of like a cinematic thing. But like for how gameplay works, it's a lot more like laying pieces of a puzzle together and being able to guy run down the field, and then if the game player moves his joystick to the right, there has to be an animation that makes him juke to the right, or he does a spin. So everything has to be accounted for. So it has to be coverage. So it's much more like making sure everything's there and everything's moving fluidly, and then how those animations blend in game make a big difference in how the final product goes. So it's a different way of approaching things mostly, because obviously in movies the cinematic stuff is king, and in games the gameplay is king. Cinematics is just kind of frosting. So you're going to get here to there, and that's when you use the cinematic stuff. But in games, it's mostly the gameplay and how responsive it is and whatnot, no matter what you're working on.
So how would a middle school student know that they're prepared to be an animator?
Well, in middle school, I think it's interesting because, again, I say this a lot to younger kids I talk to who want to do what I'm doing, and I think like anything else, any profession really, but in arts especially, there's always fundamentals. If you're playing basketball, the same thing though. You go out and work on your free throws, you work on your dribbling, that kind of thing. When you're in art, you want to work on the foundational things, which are drawing, sculpting is great, things like that. It's a lot like scales in music. You're doing stuff that you are going to build on, and then when you want to go and become creative, you have something to draw upon, which is like, oh, that's how the form works. And if you learn to draw the human figure, you know, again, it's organic and it has life, and you can draw almost anything you want. So I'd say at this point, focus on the fundamentals, whatever you do. So I would say I'd be drawing, and then if you get a little, there's a couple little, you know, like I know Maya, which is a computer program, has a free learning edition. You can go online and you can get that, and you can't do a lot of professional stuff with it, but you can go do a bouncing ball, and that's a great little thing to do. It's kind of fun when at first up and down and the ball squashes when it hits the ground. It's a lot of fun. So I'd say like first do the drawing, fundamental stuff, and if you wanted to get into the basics, you know, there's some programs online you can get and just kind of play around with.
Thank you for meeting with us today and sharing about your career.
Sure, it's my pleasure.